Reflections on Philippine Politics from the Revolutionary Period to the Present. An Analytical and Historical Perspective. Preface. The history of Philippine politics is a story of struggle, resilience, and transformation. From the first cries of revolution against Spanish rule to the challenges of modern democracy, the Filipino people have continuously fought for their rights, identity, and sovereignty. This book seeks to reflect on the political journey of the Philippines, exploring how past events have shaped the present and what lessons they hold for the future. As a country that has experienced colonization, dictatorship, and democracy, the Philippines offers a unique perspective on governance and political change. Through this book, I aim to present an insightful analysis of key political events, the leaders who influenced them, and the broader implications on the nation's development. This work is not just a historical account, it is a reflection. By looking back at our past, we can better understand the patterns, mistakes, and victories that define Philippine politics today. More importantly, it serves as a reminder that every Filipino has a role in shaping the country's future. May this book inspire thought, discussion, and action for a better Philippines. Gil de las Armas. April 4, 2025, Shepparton, Victoria, Australia. Dedication. To the Filipino people, past, present, and future, who have fought, struggled, and dreamed of a better nation. To the unsung heroes who continue to push for justice, democracy, and good governance. And to the next generation of Filipinos, may you learn from history, question the present, and build a brighter future. Description. Reflections on Philippine politics from the revolutionary period to the present. The political history of the Philippines is a tale of revolutions, resistance, and reform. From the struggle for independence against colonial powers to the rise and fall of political leaders, the country's governance has been shaped by a mix of triumphs and turmoil. This book offers a comprehensive reflection on Philippine politics, examining the key events, figures, and policies that have influenced the nation's political landscape. Covering the revolutionary period, colonial rule, martial law, the people power movement, and the complexities of modern governance, it provides a critical analysis of how the past continues to shape the present. Engaging and thought-provoking, Reflections on Philippine Politics is a must-read for students, scholars, and anyone interested in understanding the dynamics of power, leadership, and democracy in the Philippines. More than just a historical account, it is a call for awareness, action, and hope for a better future. Table of Contents. Introduction. Purpose of the e-book. Importance of reflecting on Philippine political history. How historical events shape modern governance. Chapter 1. The Revolutionary Period, 1896 to 1898. The Katipunan and the Call for Independence. The role of Andres Bonifacio and Emilio Aguinaldo. The Declaration of Philippine Independence, 1898. Reflections. Did the revolution achieve its goals? Chapter 2. The American Colonial Period, 1898 to 1946. Treaty of Paris and U.S. Occupation. Philippine-American War and Resistance Movements. The establishment of the Philippine Commonwealth, 1935. The transition to self-rule and the struggle for sovereignty. Chapter 3. The Japanese Occupation and World War II, 1941 to 1945. Impact of war on governance and Filipino resistance. The Second Philippine Republic under Jose P. Laurel. Liberation and the return of American influence. Chapter 4. The Post-War Republic and Early Independence, 1946 to 1965. Manuel Roxas and the Challenges of a Newly Independent Nation. Economic Policies and Ties with the U.S. The Rise of Political Dynasties and Corruption Issues. Chapter 5. The Marcos Era and Martial Law, 1965 to 1986. The Rise of Ferdinand Marcos and the Declaration of Martial Law, 1972. Human Rights Abuses and Economic Policies. The People Power Revolution, 1986, and the Fall of Marcos. Reflections: How did this period shape modern politics? Chapter 6: The Post-EDSA Governments, 1986 to 2000. Corazon Aquino's Administration and Democratic Restoration. The Ramos Administration and Economic Liberalization. The Estrada Presidency and Impeachment Controversies. Chapter 7: The 21st Century Philippine Politics, 2001-present. The Arroyo Presidency, Political Survival and Corruption Allegations. The Aquino Administration and the Return of Deng Matuwid. Duterte's populist leadership and controversial policies. The Marcos Jr. Administration, Continuity or Change. Chapter 8: The Future of Philippine Politics. Political dynasties and their influence. The role of youth and social media in shaping politics. Challenges and prospects for good governance. Conclusion. Key lessons from Philippine political history. How history informs present and future governance. Call to action: the role of citizens in shaping the nation. Introduction. Purpose of the ebook. The political history of the Philippines is a story of resilience, struggle, and transformation. From the revolutionary cries of the Katipunan in 1896 to the present-day challenges of governance, each era has shaped the nation's democratic evolution, political institutions, and civic consciousness. This book aims to provide a reflective and analytical exploration of Philippine politics, how it has developed through time, the lessons history offers, and the challenges the country continues to face. This is not merely a chronological account of political events. Instead, it is a critical reflection on the nation's political journey, highlighting the aspirations, betrayals, victories, and setbacks that have defined the Filipino people's relationship with power and governance. Through this book, I hope to encourage readers to question, understand, and engage with the country's political system with a deeper sense of awareness and responsibility. As the saying goes, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Understanding the trajectory of Philippine politics allows us to recognize patterns, cycles of reform and corruption, periods of authoritarian rule and democratic resurgence, moments of national unity and political division. By looking back, we gain insight into how past struggles continue to influence present challenges and how today's political decisions will shape the country's future. The importance of reflecting on Philippine political history. Politics is not just about laws, policies, and government structures. It is about the people who have shaped, challenged, and resisted them. Reflecting on Philippine political history allows us to appreciate the sacrifices made for freedom and democracy, while also critically examining the systems and institutions that have either upheld or undermined these ideals. The country has experienced colonial rule under Spain, the United States, and Japan, each leaving a lasting impact on its governance and political culture. Spanish rule introduced centralized authority, Catholicism, and the exclusionary power of the elite, while American colonization brought democratic ideals but also economic dependence. The Japanese occupation tested the nation's endurance, forcing Filipinos to confront war, collaboration, and resistance. Post-independence politics saw cycles of hope and disillusionment, from the early years of self-governance under Manuel Roxas to the democratic challenges faced under Ferdinand Marcos's martial law. The People Power Revolution of 1986 marked a pivotal moment in Philippine history, proving the power of civic action in overthrowing authoritarian rule. Yet, despite the return to democracy, issues of corruption, dynastic politics, and populist leadership continue to plague the country. By reflecting on these events, we can answer critical questions. How have colonial legacies shaped modern Philippine governance? Why does political dynasticism persist despite democratic structures? What lessons can we learn from past revolutions, and are they still relevant today? How historical events shape modern governance? Every period in Philippine history has contributed to the political system that exists today. The Spanish colonial period, 1565 to 1898, established a hierarchical society dominated by elites, principalia, a system that still influences political dynasties today. It also introduced centralized governance under Spanish authorities, a structure that continued even after independence. The Philippine Revolution, 1896 to 1898, and the First Philippine Republic, 1899, proved that Filipinos were capable of self-rule, though internal divisions and external interventions ultimately hindered their success. American colonial rule, 1898 to 1946, introduced democratic institutions such as elections, a legislature, and a constitution, but also nurtured an elite-led democracy that excluded much of the population. The Japanese occupation, 1941 to 1945, demonstrated the resilience of Filipinos in the face of oppression, with guerrilla movements and underground governments forming as acts of resistance. The post-war republic, 1946 to 1965, saw the emergence of political patronage, economic dependence on the US, and the beginnings of political dynasties that continue to dominate today. The martial law era, 1972 to 1986, under Marcos highlighted the dangers of authoritarianism, the weakening of democratic institutions, and the consequences of political corruption and cronyism. The People Power Revolution, 1986, and the post-EDSA administrations showed both the strengths and weaknesses of a restored democracy. While institutions were rebuilt, the same elite families continued to wield power. Today, Philippine politics remains a mixture of democratic ideals and historical legacies of colonialism, authoritarianism, and elite dominance. While the country has embraced elections, free speech, and civic engagement, issues such as corruption, political dynasties, and misinformation still challenge its democratic progress. Final thoughts. This book is an invitation to reflect on the past and its deep connections to the present. Political events do not happen in isolation. They are products of history, shaped by past decisions and societal structures. By understanding where we came from, we can better navigate the political realities of today and contribute to shaping a better future for the Philippines. As we explore the country's political journey, may we not only remember history but also learn from it. Chapter 1, The Revolutionary Period, 1896 to 1898. The Philippine Revolution of 1896 was a defining moment in the country's history, a bold and determined uprising against Spanish colonial rule that had governed the islands for over 3 centuries. This period was marked by both unity and division, heroism and betrayal, victory and defeat. It set the stage for the birth of the Filipino nation, though its ultimate success was overshadowed by the intervention of foreign powers. This chapter delves into the key elements of the revolution, its leaders, and the complex reality of its outcomes. The Katipunan and the call for independence. The seeds of revolution were planted long before 1896. For more than 300 years, the Philippines had been under Spanish rule, with Filipinos subjected to oppressive taxation, forced labor, holo y servicios, racial discrimination, and the abuses of the Spanish clergy and colonial administrators. While earlier revolts had erupted in different parts of the archipelago, these were often isolated and lacked widespread coordination. It was not until the late 19th century that a truly national movement for independence emerged. The Katipunan, Katostasam, Kagalangalangang Katipunan ng Mga Anak ng Bayan, or KKK, was founded on July 7, 1892, by Andres Bonifacio, Ladislao Diwa, Teodoro Plata, and other revolutionaries in response to Spain's continued refusal to grant reforms. Unlike the reformist movement led by Jose Rizal and the propaganda movement, which sought change through peaceful means, the Katipunan believed that only armed struggle could free the Philippines. The organization operated in secrecy, recruiting members across different social classes, including workers, farmers, and intellectuals. In August 1896, the Spanish authorities discovered the existence of the Katipunan, prompting Bonifacio to initiate an armed uprising. The Cry of Balintawak, or Cry of Pugadloin, depending on historical sources, marked the formal beginning of the revolution. The Katipuneros tore their cédulas, residence tax certificates, as a symbolic rejection of Spanish rule and prepared for battle. However, early engagements in Manila and surrounding provinces were met with severe Spanish retaliation, forcing the revolutionaries to retreat and regroup. The role of Andres Bonifacio and Emilio Aguinaldo. Two figures stood at the center of the Philippine Revolution, Andres Bonifacio and Emilio Aguinaldo. Their contrasting leadership styles, backgrounds, and visions for the revolution would later lead to conflict, shaping the course of Philippine history. Andres Bonifacio, the father of the Philippine Revolution. Bonifacio, often called the father of the Philippine Revolution, was a self-educated man from humble beginnings. Inspired by the ideals of the French Revolution and the writings of Rizal, he envisioned a free and equal society for Filipinos. As the founder and leader of the Katipunan, Bonifacio believed in mass mobilization and direct action against Spanish forces. However, despite his commitment, Bonifacio struggled with military strategy. Many of the early battles led by the Katipunan resulted in losses due to poor coordination and lack of arms. His leadership was also challenged by factions within the revolutionary movement, particularly those from Cavite, where a more structured and better equipped force emerged under Emilio Aguinaldo. Emilio Aguinaldo, the general and the politician. Aguinaldo, a young and charismatic leader from Cavite, rose to prominence due to his battlefield victories against the Spaniards. Unlike Bonifacio, Aguinaldo was from the Principalia, the elite class of Filipinos who had influence under Spanish rule, and he was supported by Cavite's wealthy families. His military success made him a favored leader among many revolutionaries. The rivalry between Bonifacio's radical approach and Aguinaldo's more tactical and politically minded leadership led to internal conflict. At the Tegaros Convention, March 22, 1897, a meeting held to reorganize the revolutionary government, Aguinaldo was elected president of the new revolutionary government, while Bonifacio was demoted to a lower position. Feeling betrayed, Bonifacio declared the results invalid and attempted to establish his own government. However, Aguinaldo's forces arrested him, and in May 1897, Bonifacio was executed in Maragondon, Cavite, on charges of treason, a controversial decision that continues to be debated by historians. The death of Bonifacio marked a shift in leadership and strategy. Under Aguinaldo, the revolution became more structured, but it also became more compromising, as Aguinaldo sought negotiations with Spain and later with the Americans. The Declaration of Philippine Independence, 1898. Despite continued fighting, by late 1897, the revolution seemed at a deadlock. The Spanish government, struggling to contain the uprising and facing insurgencies in Cuba, sought to end hostilities. Aguinaldo, seeing an opportunity, agreed to the Pact of Bayak-Nabato, December 1897, a truce in which Spanish authorities promised reforms in exchange for Aguinaldo's exile to Hong Kong. However, the revolution did not truly end. By April 1898, tensions between Spain and the United States escalated, culminating in the Spanish-American War. The United States, seeking to expand its influence in the Pacific, launched attacks against Spanish forces in Manila. Seeing an opportunity, Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines, rallying his forces to resume the revolution. On June 12, 1898, in Cavite, Aguinaldo proclaimed Philippine independence and unveiled the Philippine flag and national anthem. It was a historic moment, but one that would later prove bittersweet. While the Declaration of Independence symbolized the aspirations of the Filipino people, it was not recognized by Spain, the United States, or any world power. Unknown to Aguinaldo, Spain had ceded the Philippines to the U.S. through the Treaty of Paris in December 1898, effectively transferring control from one colonial ruler to another. Reflections: did the revolution achieve its goals? The Philippine Revolution of 1896 remains one of the most significant yet complex events in Philippine history. It was the first unified movement for independence, demonstrating the Filipinos' willingness to fight for freedom. However, the revolution also revealed deep-seated internal divisions and class conflicts, leadership struggles, and competing visions for the nation. Successes of the revolution. White heavy check market awakened national consciousness among Filipinos. Before the revolution, many Filipinos saw themselves as subjects of Spain rather than as a unified people. White heavy check market laid the foundation for Philippine independence, proving that Filipinos were capable of self-rule. White heavy check market weakened Spanish control, forcing Spain to consider reforms and ultimately abandon the colony. Failures and unfinished goals. Crossmark the revolution was incomplete, independence was declared but not recognized internationally. Crossmark the execution of Bonifacio exposed the fragility of Filipino unity and the consequences of political rivalry. Crossmark the intervention of the United States led to another era of colonial rule instead of true independence. Ultimately, the Philippine Revolution was a stepping stone toward independence, but it did not fully achieve its goals. It was only in 1946, after World War II, that the Philippines would finally attain full sovereignty. Final thought. Had the revolution been more united, without internal power struggles, could it have led to a truly independent Philippines sooner? This remains one of the most thought-provoking questions in Philippine history. Chapter 2, The American Colonial Period, 1898 to 1946. The American colonial period was one of the most defining eras in Philippine political history. It was a time of transition, marked by promises of democracy, violent resistance, and the continuing struggle for genuine independence. The United States, presenting itself as a benevolent force, introduced new political structures that shaped the country's governance for decades. However, this period was also filled with contradictions. While it laid the groundwork for self-rule, it also reinforced foreign dominance and economic dependence. This chapter explores the key political developments under American rule, from the Treaty of Paris that ended Spanish colonization to the eventual recognition of Philippine independence in 1946. Through an analysis of resistance movements, colonial policies, and the establishment of the Philippine Commonwealth, we reflect on how this era shaped the nation's democratic aspirations and its challenges in achieving true sovereignty. The Treaty of Paris and U.S. occupation, 1898 to 1902. The fate of the Philippines was sealed not by its own people, but by the signing of the Treaty of Paris on December 10, 1898. In this agreement, Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States for $20 million, marking the end of Spanish rule but also the beginning of a new era of colonialism. The treaty was signed without the consent of Filipinos, disregarding the revolutionary efforts that had already declared Philippine independence on June 12, 1898 under Emilio Aguinaldo. For the United States, the Philippines was seen as both a strategic and economic asset, providing a foothold in Asia and a source of raw materials. American officials framed their occupation as a civilizing mission, promoting democracy, education, and infrastructure development. However, many Filipinos viewed it as a betrayal of their aspirations for self-rule. The resulting tensions soon escalated into a full-scale war between Filipino revolutionaries and American forces. Reflection. The Treaty of Paris exemplifies how colonialism operated through diplomacy that excluded the voices of the colonized. The Filipinos, who had fought hard against Spain, were suddenly handed over to another foreign power. This event raises an important question: was the U.S. intervention truly about democracy, or was it simply another form of imperialism? For the United States, the Philippines was seen as both a strategic and economic asset, providing a foothold in Asia and a source of raw materials. American officials framed their occupation as a civilizing mission, promoting democracy, education, and infrastructure development. However, many Filipinos viewed it as a betrayal of their aspirations for self-rule. The resulting tensions soon escalated into a full-scale war between Filipino revolutionaries and American forces. The Philippine-American War and Resistance Movements, 1899 to 1913. As the Americans took control, Filipino forces led by Emilio Aguinaldo resisted. The Philippine-American War, 1899 to 1902, erupted when tensions between the two sides boiled over, particularly after the Battle of Manila, February 4, 1899. The war was brutal and asymmetrical. Filipino troops, lacking advanced weaponry, engaged in guerrilla warfare against the better-equipped American forces. Key aspects of the war. Brutality and atrocities. The conflict saw large-scale destruction, with tens of thousands of Filipino soldiers killed and hundreds of thousands of civilians perishing due to famine, disease, and violence. The US military adopted harsh tactics, including the Balangiga massacre and the use of concentration camps in Batangas and Samar. Aguinaldo's capture, 1901. The war took a turning point when Aguinaldo was captured in Palanan, Isabela, on March 23, 1901. He later swore allegiance to the US, marking the official end of organized resistance. Continued insurgency, 1902 to 1913. While the US declared the war over in 1902, resistance persisted, especially among the Muslim communities in Mindanao, the Moro Rebellion, 1902 to 1913, who fiercely opposed American rule. Reflection. The Philippine-American War was a testament to the Filipino spirit of resistance, but it also exposed the harsh realities of colonial rule. The Americans, despite advocating democracy, suppressed Filipino self-determination through military force. This contradiction is central to understanding later struggles for true sovereignty. The establishment of the Philippine Commonwealth, 1935. Despite their colonial rule, the Americans also introduced political reforms aimed at preparing the Philippines for eventual self-governance. The Philippine Organic Act of 1902 and the Jones Law of 1916 granted limited political participation, establishing a legislature with elected Filipino representatives. A major shift came with the Tidings-McDuffie Act, 1934, which laid out a path for Philippine independence. Under this law, the Philippine Commonwealth was established in 1935, serving as a transitional government for 10 years before full sovereignty. Key developments under the Commonwealth. President Manuel L. Quezon, 1935 to 1944, elected as the first president of the Commonwealth, Quezon sought to establish a strong national identity, promote social justice, and prepare the country for full independence. National defense and economy. Anticipating threats, the Commonwealth began building military defenses, which proved crucial during World War II. Economically, however, the country remained dependent on the US for trade. Limitations of self-governance. While Filipinos gained more political control, the US retained power over foreign affairs, military decisions, and the economy. Reflection. The Commonwealth period was a step toward independence, but was it true autonomy? While it allowed Filipinos to manage internal governance, the US still had the final say in many critical matters. The question of sovereignty remained unresolved. The transition to self-rule and the struggle for sovereignty, 1941 to 1946. World War II and Japanese occupation, 1941 to 1945. Before full independence could be realized, the Japanese invasion, 1941, disrupted the Commonwealth. The occupation was marked by extreme hardship, collaborationist politics, and a strong resistance movement, including the Hakbalahap guerrillas. During this period, President Jose P. Laurel led a puppet government under Japanese supervision, though he secretly worked to mitigate Japan's control. The United States, after liberating the Philippines in 1945, reasserted its influence in the country. The war devastated the economy and infrastructure, setting back progress towards self-rule. Independence achieved July 4, 1946. Finally, on July 4, 1946, the Philippines was granted independence under the Treaty of Manila. Manuel Roxas became the first president of the newly sovereign republic. However, the independence came with economic agreements, such as parity rights, allowing Americans to retain economic privileges in the country. Reflection. While independence was officially achieved, many Filipinos questioned whether the country had truly broken free from American influence. Economic dependence and military agreements kept the US involved in Philippine affairs for decades to come. The struggle for genuine self-rule, it seemed, was far from over. Final reflections on the American colonial period. The American colonial period was a paradox. It introduced democracy while suppressing independence, promised progress while maintaining economic control, and paved the way for sovereignty while ensuring continued US influence. Filipinos of this era faced difficult choices. Some collaborated with the Americans in hopes of modernization, while others resisted, seeing any form of foreign rule as unacceptable. The legacies of this period, from political institutions to economic structures, still shape Philippine politics today. Ultimately, this era teaches us that independence is not merely declared, it must be earned, defended, and sustained. The question remains, has the Philippines fully achieved the sovereignty that its early revolutionaries envisioned? Chapter 3, The Japanese Occupation and World War II, 1941 to 1945. The Japanese occupation of the Philippines, 1941 to 1945, was one of the darkest periods in the nation's history. It was a time of war, suffering, and moral dilemmas, where governance was marked by both collaboration and resistance. The invasion exposed the vulnerabilities of the Philippine Commonwealth and tested the resilience of the Filipino people. The occupation not only disrupted political institutions but also left a deep scar on the country's collective memory, influencing its post-war governance and relationship with foreign powers. Impact of war on governance and Filipino resistance. When Japan launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, it also began its assault on the Philippines, then an American colony. The Philippine Defense Forces, under General Douglas MacArthur, were quickly overwhelmed. Manila fell to the Japanese on January 2, 1942, and the government of President Manuel L. Quezon retreated to Corregidor before eventually going into exile in the United States. With the fall of the Commonwealth government, the Japanese established a military administration. Their rule was characterized by strict martial law, propaganda, and attempts to win Filipino support through the ideology of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which sought to justify Japan's expansion as a movement for Asian liberation from Western colonial rule. However, the brutality of Japanese forces, evidenced by war crimes such as the Bataan Death March, forced labor, ramusha, and widespread atrocities, quickly alienated much of the population. In response, resistance movements emerged across the archipelago. Various guerrilla groups, such as the Hakbalaha, Hakboimbayan Laban Sa Hapon, in central Luzon, engaged in sabotage, intelligence gathering, and armed rebellion. Despite limited resources, these resistance fighters demonstrated remarkable courage, proving that the Filipino spirit could not be subdued. However, the war also caused deep divisions among Filipinos, as some collaborated with the Japanese while others fought against them, conflicts that would later influence post-war politics. The Second Philippine Republic under Jose P. Laurel. In 1943, under Japanese pressure, a new government was established, the Second Philippine Republic, with Jose P. Laurel as president. Though portrayed as an independent Filipino government, it operated under heavy Japanese control. The legitimacy of this administration remains a topic of historical debate. Was it an act of betrayal or a strategic means of survival? Laurel's presidency was fraught with challenges. He had to navigate Japanese demands while attempting to protect Filipino interests. His government promoted nationalism, even declaring Tagalog as the national language. However, its power was limited, and it struggled to address the economic collapse and food shortages caused by the war. One of Laurel's most controversial decisions was his declaration of war against the United States and Great Britain in 1944, a move dictated by Japan but largely ignored by the Filipino public, who still saw the Americans as allies. By late 1944, as the tides of war shifted and the Americans prepared to retake the Philippines, Laurel and his government were forced to flee to Japan, marking the collapse of the Second Republic. Liberation and the return of American influence. By October 1944, General MacArthur fulfilled his famous promise, "I shall return." The Battle of Leyte Gulf, one of the largest naval battles in history, marked the beginning of the American campaign to liberate the Philippines. The battles that followed, particularly the destruction of Manila in early 1945, were devastating. The city was reduced to ruins, and tens of thousands of Filipinos perished in what is now known as the Manila Massacre. The return of American forces led to the restoration of the Philippine Commonwealth under President Sergio Osmeña, who had succeeded Quezon after his death in exile. However, the war had left the country in ruins, its economy shattered, infrastructure destroyed, and thousands of lives lost. Despite the devastation, the end of the war reinforced American influence over the Philippines. The United States provided economic aid through the Philippine Rehabilitation Act, but at the cost of agreements such as the Bell Trade Act and the Parity Rights Amendment, which gave American businesses the same economic rights as Filipinos. This continued dependency on the U.S. shaped the country's post-war political and economic landscape. Reflections on the Japanese occupation. The Japanese occupation was a period of both suffering and resilience for the Filipino people. It tested the nation's loyalty, divided its leaders, and forced difficult moral choices. It also revealed the complexities of colonial power. While Japan framed itself as a liberator, its rule proved just as oppressive as previous colonizers. This period also left lasting political implications. The collaboration versus resistance debate haunted figures like Laurel, whose presidency was later scrutinized, though he was eventually granted amnesty. The war strengthened nationalist movements, particularly among the Hukbalahap, who later transitioned into a communist insurgency that challenged the post-war government. Perhaps the most important lesson from this era is that foreign powers, whether Western or Asian, will always have their own interests. The war underscored the need for self-reliance, a lesson that remains relevant in contemporary Philippine politics. As we reflect on this period, we must ask, how do we honor the sacrifices of those who fought for freedom? How can the Philippines ensure that its sovereignty is never again compromised by foreign influence? The answers to these questions continue to shape the nation's path forward. Chapter 4: The Post-War Republic and Early Independence, 1946 to 1965. Manuel Roxas and the Challenges of a Newly Independent Nation. On July 4, 1946, the Philippines finally achieved what it had long fought for: independence from foreign rule. After nearly 400 years under Spanish colonialism, followed by decades of American control and the devastation of World War II, the country stood on the threshold of self-governance. However, true independence came with an array of challenges. The nation lay in ruins, with Manila among the most heavily bombed cities of the war, infrastructure destroyed, and an economy left in shambles. The first president of the independent Philippines, Manuel Roxas, faced the monumental task of nation-building amidst this backdrop of devastation. Roxas' administration had to confront the immediate reality that, while political independence had been granted, economic and military ties to the United States remained deeply entrenched. The Philippine Trade Act of 1946, Bell Trade Act, a precondition for receiving much-needed U.S. war rehabilitation aid, required the Philippines to give preferential economic rights to American citizens and corporations, including parity rights that allowed them to own land and businesses just like Filipinos. This agreement sparked controversy, as many saw it as a continuation of economic colonialism, preventing the Philippines from achieving full economic sovereignty. Furthermore, post-war politics was marked by a fragile democracy. The Hukbalahap, Hakbang Bayan Laban Sa Hapon, a guerrilla group that had fought the Japanese during the war, had transformed into an armed communist movement resisting the government. Agrarian unrest, particularly in central Luzon, highlighted the deep economic inequalities that had persisted from the Spanish era. Instead of addressing the root causes of peasant dissatisfaction, the Roxas administration labeled the Hooks as subversives and cracked down on them militarily, sowing the seeds of continued rebellion in the countryside. Roxas' presidency was short-lived. He died of a heart attack in 1948, just 2 years after taking office, but the challenges he faced would define the early years of Philippine independence. His successor, Elpidio Quirino, inherited the problems of economic dependency, political instability, and the widening gap between the wealthy elite and the struggling masses. Economic policies and ties with the U.S. The post-war period saw the Philippines trying to strike a balance between maintaining close economic ties with the United States and asserting its own economic independence. While U.S. assistance played a crucial role in rebuilding the war-torn nation, it also reinforced a dependency that limited the Philippines' ability to industrialize on its own terms. One of the major economic policies during this period was the Laurel-Langley Agreement, 1954, which extended the preferential trade agreement with the U.S. until 1974 but allowed for some gradual Filipino control over industries. However, this agreement did little to break the cycle of dependency. Many of the country's largest industries, including agriculture, particularly sugar, coconut, and abaca exports, remained tied to the U.S. market, making the economy vulnerable to shifts in American trade policies. Despite some efforts at industrialization under President Ramon Magsaysay, 1953 to 1957, the country largely remained an import substitution economy, where consumer goods were imported rather than locally produced. This economic model benefited the political and business elite but stifled the growth of a strong local manufacturing base. Magsaysay, however, is remembered for his populist approach and his efforts to address social inequality. His Land Reform Act of 1955 was an attempt to redistribute land to tenant farmers, though it had limited impact due to lack of enforcement and resistance from powerful landowners. He also pursued a more diplomatic approach in dealing with the Hakbalahap insurgency, offering amnesty and resettlement programs to rebels willing to lay down arms. Magsaysay's unexpected death in a plane crash in 1957 marked the end of a presidency that, while imperfect, sought to bring governance closer to the people. His successor, Carlos P. Garcia, 1957 to 1961, attempted to push for greater Filipino economic control through his Filipino First policy, which aimed to prioritize Filipino businesses over foreign ones. While well-intentioned, this policy was undermined by lack of enforcement, political resistance, and corruption. It also failed to attract sufficient investments to sustain long-term economic growth, leading to economic stagnation. The rise of political dynasties and corruption issues. As the Philippines navigated its early years of independence, one of the most enduring problems that emerged was the entrenchment of political dynasties. The same wealthy families that had held power during the Spanish and American periods continued to dominate politics, ensuring that governance remained a privilege of the elite rather than a tool for national development. The electoral process, though democratic in principle, became a battleground for patronage politics. Politicians relied on vast personal wealth and networks of influence to secure votes, often through vote buying, coercion, and manipulation. This system allowed families to pass down political power across generations, limiting opportunities for genuine political reform and perpetuating a cycle where government positions were used for personal gain rather than public service. Corruption also became a serious issue during this period. While Elpidio Quirino's administration, 1948 to 1953, made efforts to stabilize the country, it was marred by allegations of corruption and nepotism, which fueled dissatisfaction among the public. This opened the door for the rise of Ramon Magsaysay, who positioned himself as a leader of the masses and a champion of clean governance. However, even his presidency could not fully dismantle the entrenched corruption in government institutions. By the time Diosdado Macapagal, 1961 to 1965, took office, he inherited an economic crisis and a deeply flawed political system. Macapagal attempted to implement land reform programs to address rural poverty, but his efforts were met with resistance from the landed elite, many of whom were members of Congress. His administration also struggled with economic instability and continued political maneuvering by traditional power blocs. The frustration over economic stagnation and political corruption created the conditions that would eventually allow Ferdinand Marcos to rise to power in 1965. Marcos presented himself as a strong leader who could bring stability and progress to the country, but his presidency would later take the Philippines down a path of authoritarian rule. Reflections on the post-war republic and early independence. The period from 1946 to 1965 was a pivotal era in Philippine political history. It was a time of hope, as the country sought to rebuild itself from the destruction of war, but also a period of missed opportunities and the entrenchment of systemic problems that still haunt Philippine politics today. The illusion of independence. While the Philippines gained political independence in 1946, its economic and military dependence on the U.S. persisted. This raises the question, was the country ever truly independent, or was it merely transitioning from one form of foreign control to another? Unfulfilled promises of democracy. The democratic institutions established in the post-war period were meant to give power to the people, yet they were captured by the elite, reinforcing the same inequalities that had existed under colonial rule. Did the post-war leaders do enough to empower ordinary Filipinos, or did they simply preserve the status quo? A cycle of corruption and political dynasties, the failure to break away from patronage politics and elite rule meant that corruption remained deeply ingrained in governance. This raises an important lesson. Without genuine political reforms, democracy can become a mere facade, serving the interests of a few rather than the welfare of the many. As we reflect on this period, we must ask, what lessons can we learn from the post-war republic? How do we ensure that political power is not monopolized by the few, but truly serves the people? The answers to these questions will continue to shape the future of the nation. Chapter 5: The Marcos Era and Martial Law, 1965 to 1986. The period from 1965 to 1986 remains one of the most controversial and defining chapters in Philippine history. Ferdinand Marcos, a skilled politician and masterful strategist, rose to power with the promise of progress and stability. However, his two-decade rule was marked by a transition from democracy to dictatorship, widespread human rights abuses, economic decline, and ultimately, a historic people-led revolution. This chapter explores the rise of Marcos, the declaration of martial law, its far-reaching consequences, and how this period continues to shape Philippine politics today. The rise of Ferdinand Marcos and the declaration of martial law, 1972. Ferdinand Marcos won the presidency in 1965 as the standard-bearer of the Nacionalista Party, defeating incumbent President Diosdado Macapagal. A charismatic and ambitious leader, Marcos promised infrastructure development, modernization, and strong leadership. His administration initially delivered on these promises, constructing roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals, earning him the image of a progressive leader. However, Marcos harbored greater ambitions. In 1969, he became the first Philippine president to win re-election, securing a second term against Sergio Osmeña Jr. However, this victory was tainted by allegations of massive electoral fraud and overspending, leading to a deteriorating economy and rising political instability. The early 1970s saw increasing protests, labor strikes, and student movements, fueled by widespread dissatisfaction with corruption, social inequality, and economic downturns. Amidst this growing unrest, Marcos laid the groundwork for extending his rule beyond the constitutional two-term limit. On September 21, 1972, Marcos signed Proclamation No. 1081, placing the entire country under martial law, a move justified by the need to suppress communist insurgency and restore order. In reality, it was a pretext to consolidate power and silence dissent. Martial law suspended civil liberties, closed media outlets, and led to the arrest of opposition leaders, including Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. The Constitution was rewritten, and in 1973, Marcos effectively abolished the presidential term limit, allowing him to stay in power indefinitely. Human rights abuses and economic policies. Under martial law, the Marcos regime ruled with an iron fist. Thousands of activists, journalists, and political opponents were arrested, tortured, or killed by the military and the police. Reports of disappearances, summary executions, and sexual violence against detainees became rampant. The Marcos government maintained a climate of fear, where speaking out against the administration could result in imprisonment or worse. Despite these authoritarian policies, Marcos sought to maintain an illusion of economic progress. He borrowed heavily from foreign creditors to fund massive infrastructure projects, including the San Juanico Bridge, cultural center of the Philippines, and the Bataan nuclear power plant. These projects created jobs and boosted economic activity, but they also plunged the country into crippling debt. By the early 1980s, the economy began to collapse under the weight of corruption, mismanagement, and excessive borrowing. The crony capitalist system, where Marcos and his allies controlled key industries, led to wealth concentration among a select few while the rest of the country suffered from economic decline. Inflation skyrocketed, and poverty levels increased, contradicting the government's propaganda of economic stability. The assassination of Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. in 1983, upon his return from exile, became a turning point. His death galvanized opposition against Marcos and sparked widespread protests. The public grew increasingly restless, demanding democratic reforms and an end to dictatorship. The People Power Revolution, 1986, and the fall of Marcos. By 1986, international and domestic pressure forced Marcos to hold a snap presidential election against Corazon Cory Aquino, the widow of Ninoy Aquino. The election was widely seen as fraudulent, with Marcos being declared the winner despite overwhelming public support for Aquino. In response, millions of Filipinos took to the streets in what became known as the EDSA People Power Revolution, February 22 to 25, 1986. For 4 days, civilians, religious leaders, soldiers, and ordinary citizens gathered along Epifanio de los Santos Avenue, EDSA, demanding Marcos's resignation. Despite military threats, the protesters remained peaceful, and Marcos's key allies, including Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile and General Fidel Ramos, withdrew their support. On February 25, 1986, Marcos and his family were forced to flee to Hawaii, ending his 21-year rule. Corazon Aquino was sworn in as the new president, marking the restoration of democracy. Reflections: how did this period shape modern politics? The Marcos era left a lasting impact on Philippine politics, governance, and national consciousness. While it ended in a democratic restoration, its effects continue to be felt in various ways. 1. The enduring legacy of martial law. The Marcos regime showed the dangers of authoritarianism and how power can be abused when checks and balances are weakened. The suppression of dissent, media censorship, and political killings serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of democracy. However, the debate over martial law remains alive today, with some still praising Marcos for his infrastructure projects and discipline, while others condemn his regime's brutality. 2. The rise of political dynasties. The Marcoses never truly disappeared from Philippine politics. Despite their exile, they slowly regained influence. Imelda Marcos and her children, including Bongbong Marcos, returned to the political arena, with Bongbong eventually becoming president in 2022. The persistence of the Marcos family underscores the Philippine struggle with political dynasties, where power remains concentrated among a few influential families. 3. The role of people power and public dissent. The people power revolution demonstrated that mass movements can topple oppressive regimes. However, over time, public disillusionment with traditional politicians led to apathy and political fatigue, making it easier for strongman leaders to return to power. 4. Economic consequences and the debt crisis. The economic mismanagement under Marcos left the Philippines burdened with debt that took decades to repay. The period exposed the dangers of corruption and over-reliance on foreign loans, shaping future economic policies and reforms. 5. The cycle of authoritarianism and democracy. The Marcos era planted seeds of distrust in democratic institutions, paving the way for later leaders who adopted authoritarian tendencies. The election of Rodrigo Duterte in 2016, with his strongman approach and disregard for human rights, drew comparisons to Marcos. The question remains, has the Philippines truly learned from history, or is it doomed to repeat it? Conclusion: the Marcos era was a time of grand ambition, ruthless dictatorship, and ultimate reckoning. It exposed the vulnerabilities of democracy and the dangers of unchecked power. While the people power revolution marked a triumph for democracy, its long-term effects remain mixed. As the Philippines continues to navigate its political future, the lessons of martial law and the Marcos dictatorship must not be forgotten. The responsibility now lies with the younger generation to question, to remember, and to ensure that history does not repeat itself. Chapter 6: The Post-EDSA Governments, 1986 to 2000. Restoring Democracy, Economic Shifts, and Political Controversies. The fall of the Marcos dictatorship in 1986, brought about by the historic EDSA People Power Revolution, marked a turning point in Philippine politics. The ousting of a dictator and the peaceful transition of power to Corazon Aquino was seen as the rebirth of democracy. However, the post-EDSA years were not free from political and economic challenges. The succeeding administrations had to grapple with institutional rebuilding, economic reforms, and political instability. This chapter examines the administrations of Corazon Aquino, Fidel V. Ramos, and Joseph Estrada, exploring how they navigated the turbulent transition from dictatorship to democracy, the economic liberalization of the 1990s, and the political controversies that culminated in another mass movement against a sitting president. Corazon Aquino's administration, 1986 to 1992, restoring democracy in a fractured nation. The legacy of EDSA and democratic transition. Corazon Aquino, widow of the slain opposition leader Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., was thrust into the presidency as the face of democratic restoration. Her administration had to rebuild institutions that had been weakened under Marcos's authoritarian rule. One of her first and most significant acts was the drafting of the 1987 Constitution, which restored democratic institutions, reinstated checks and balances, and limited presidential powers to prevent another dictatorship. However, transitioning from dictatorship to democracy proved difficult. Aquino faced repeated threats to her leadership, including 7 coup attempts led by rebel factions within the military who had once supported the People Power movement but were disillusioned by her governance. These destabilization efforts reflected the deep political divisions within the country. Land reform and economic struggles. One of Aquino's flagship programs was the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, CARP, which aimed to redistribute land to farmers. However, its implementation was flawed, and it failed to significantly break the power of large landowning families, including Aquino's own Cojuangco clan, which was embroiled in disputes over Hacienda Luisita. Economically, her administration struggled with debt inherited from Marcos's regime. While she sought to restore investor confidence, growth was slow, and widespread poverty persisted. The lack of decisive economic policies left many Filipinos disillusioned, proving that restoring democracy alone was not enough to address the country's deeper socio-economic problems. Reflection: democracy restored, but at what cost? While Aquino is credited with restoring democratic institutions, her presidency highlighted the reality that democracy, without strong economic and political reforms, does not immediately equate to prosperity. The unresolved issues of political instability, agrarian reform, and economic recovery showed that the wounds of the Marcos years could not be healed overnight. The Ramos administration, 1992 to 1998, economic liberalization and stability. From political crisis to economic recovery. Aquino's successor, Fidel V. Ramos, a former general and one of the key figures in the EDSA revolution, took over a country still dealing with political instability. Unlike Aquino's administration, which was marked by internal conflicts, Ramos prioritized political unity and economic reforms, focusing on liberalization and modernization. Ramos is widely credited with leading the economic recovery of the Philippines. He introduced deregulation and privatization policies, aiming to reduce government intervention and encourage foreign investment. Under his leadership, the country saw consistent economic growth, which earned him praise for stabilizing the economy after the turbulent post-EDSA years. Energy crisis and infrastructure development. One of the major problems Ramos inherited was the power crisis that had caused frequent blackouts during the Aquino administration, severely hampering economic productivity. He responded by inviting private investors into the energy sector, leading to the construction of new power plants and the eventual stabilization of electricity supply. This move, however, came at a cost. Long-term power supply agreements with independent power producers, IPPs, led to high electricity prices in later years. Peace and political stability. Ramos sought national reconciliation, making peace efforts with insurgent groups. He signed a peace agreement with the Moro National Liberation Front, MNLF, in 1996 and engaged in talks with the Communist Party of the Philippines, though conflict with communist rebels continued. Despite these successes, Ramos' term was not without controversy. The economic benefits of his reforms were not felt equally, and accusations of crony capitalism persisted. Some critics argue that his privatization programs benefited only the elite, leading to income inequality that still plagues the country today. Reflection: a step forward, but who benefited? Ramos' presidency was a period of stability and economic growth, but his policies also set the stage for new economic challenges. While liberalization attracted investment, it also raised concerns about corporate monopolies and wealth concentration. His efforts at peace and reconciliation were notable, but conflicts in Mindanao and with leftist rebels remained unresolved. The Estrada administration, 1998 to 2001, populism and political downfall. The rise of populism. Joseph Irap Estrada, a former movie star, was elected in 1998 with overwhelming support from the masses. His victory reflected the growing frustration of ordinary Filipinos with elite-driven politics. Estrada's populist image, his promise to champion the poor, resonated with many, especially in urban and rural areas struggling with poverty. Corruption allegations and economic mismanagement. Despite his popularity, Estrada's presidency was marked by corruption scandals and economic mismanagement. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 had left the Philippine economy fragile, and Estrada's administration struggled to maintain investor confidence. His alleged involvement in illegal gambling operations, particularly the Yuting scandal, became a focal point of controversy. In 2000, a corruption case was filed against Estrada, accusing him of amassing wealth through illegal means. The scandal led to his impeachment trial, but when crucial evidence was blocked from being presented, public outrage erupted. This led to the EDSA-2 uprising in January 2001, forcing Estrada to step down. Reflection: the cycle of disillusionment. Estrada's rise and fall highlighted the volatility of Philippine politics. His election was a response to elite rule, but his downfall reinforced the perception that corruption was deeply embedded in the system. The irony of EDSA-2 was that while it was again a people-powered movement, its outcome did not necessarily lead to long-term democratic reforms. Instead, it revealed the persistent divide between the political elite and the masses. Conclusion: the post-EDSA years, a democracy still in transition. The post-EDSA administrations of Aquino, Ramos, and Estrada each reflected different aspects of Philippine democracy: restoration, stabilization, and disillusionment. Aquino re-established democratic institutions but struggled with political instability and economic challenges. Ramos brought economic growth and political stability but also laid the groundwork for economic inequality. Estrada represented the frustrations of the poor but ultimately became another casualty of corruption. As the Philippines entered the 21st century, it was clear that while democracy had been restored, true political and economic equity remained elusive. The question remained, was the promise of people power truly fulfilled, or had the country simply replaced one form of elite rule with another? The next chapter will explore how the administrations after 2000 continued to grapple with these lingering challenges, shaping the modern political landscape of the Philippines. Chapter 7: The 21st Century Philippine Politics, 2001-present. A reflection on leadership, reform, and the shifting political landscape. The 21st century ushered in a new era for Philippine politics, one shaped by the rapid influence of globalization, the digital age, and the continued struggle between democracy and entrenched political interests. This period has seen the fall of a populist president through a second people power revolution, the survival of a leader amidst corruption scandals, the resurgence of a political dynasty that once ruled with an iron fist, and the dramatic shift towards strongman politics in response to the growing frustration of the masses. As we reflect on this period, we must ask, has Philippine democracy matured, or has history merely repeated itself in different forms? The Arroyo presidency, a 2001 to 2010 political survival amid corruption allegations. From EDSA-2 to controversy. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo's presidency began in 2001 as a product of EDSA-2, a mass protest movement that ousted President Joseph Estrada over corruption charges. Initially hailed as a reformist, her administration quickly became embroiled in its own set of controversies. Arroyo's leadership was marked by political maneuvering, economic growth, and corruption scandals. Unlike her predecessors, she was a master of political survival, outlasting multiple coup attempts, impeachment complaints, and widespread protests. Her tenure saw economic expansion, with GDP growth averaging around 4.7% annually, largely due to strong remittances from overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, and policy reforms in key industries. However, economic gains did not translate into substantial poverty reduction, leaving many Filipinos feeling disillusioned. The Hello Garci scandal in 2005, where leaked phone conversations suggested Arroyo manipulated the 2004 elections, deeply damaged her credibility. Calls for her resignation erupted, but she managed to hold on to power through political alliances and control over Congress. Other notable controversies included the NBNZTE broadband deal and the fertilizer fund scam, both of which reinforced public perception of rampant corruption in her administration. Despite this, she maintained a strong political network, ensuring her influence even after stepping down in 2010. Reflection: was Arroyo's presidency a triumph of political strategy or a setback for democracy? Arroyo's ability to remain in power despite overwhelming opposition reflects both the resilience of political elites and the weakness of institutional checks and balances in the Philippines. Her presidency reinforced the idea that political survival often outweighs accountability, a lesson that continues to shape governance today. The Aquino administration, 2010 to 2016, the return of Dan Matuwid. Benigno Noynoy Aquino III's rise to power was propelled by public sentiment. Following the death of his mother, former President Cory Aquino, in 2009, there was a wave of nostalgia for the ideals of people power and clean governance. Campaigning on the promise of Dan Matuwid, the straight path, Aquino sought to restore faith in government by emphasizing transparency, anti-corruption efforts, and economic reforms. Achievements and challenges. Aquino's administration saw significant economic growth, with the Philippine economy averaging 6.2% GDP growth per year, one of the fastest in Southeast Asia at the time. His government focused on anti-corruption initiatives, including the impeachment of Chief Justice Renato Corona, a known Arroyo ally. Expansion of the Pantawid Pamilayang Pilipino program, for PS, which aimed to reduce poverty through conditional cash transfers. Infrastructure investments, particularly through the Public-Private Partnership (PPP) program. Strengthen foreign relations, particularly with the US and ASEAN allies, in response to China's territorial aggression in the West Philippine Sea. However, his presidency was not without controversy. The Mamasipano Massacre, 2015, where 44 Special Action Force (SAF) commandos were killed in a botched counter-terrorism operation, severely damaged Aquino's reputation. Many criticized his perceived lack of empathy and responsibility, particularly his decision to skip the arrival honors for the fallen soldiers. While Aquino's government pursued reforms, it was also accused of selective justice, as corruption investigations largely targeted opposition figures. The Disbursement Acceleration Program, DAP, a controversial government spending mechanism, was declared unconstitutional, raising questions about the administration's commitment to transparency. Reflection: did Dan Matuwid truly reform Philippine politics? Aquino's term proved that economic growth alone is not enough to satisfy public expectations. While corruption was addressed to some extent, deep-seated political patronage and inefficiency remained. His presidency marked a shift towards institutional reforms, but it also exposed the fragility of public trust, a factor that would later contribute to the rise of a more radical leader. The Duterte presidency, 2016 to 2022, populist leadership and controversial policies. Rodrigo Duterte's landslide victory in 2016 marked a dramatic shift in Philippine politics. Running on a platform of anti-crime, anti-elite, and strongman governance, he capitalized on public frustration with corruption, crime, and ineffective leadership. His presidency was characterized by the war on drugs, which resulted in thousands of extrajudicial killings and international human rights condemnation. A shift to China-friendly policies, moving away from the pro-US stance of previous administrations. A controversial push for federalism, which ultimately failed due to lack of political support. A pandemic response that received mixed reactions, with strict lockdowns but logistical inefficiencies. Duterte's leadership style was authoritarian-leaning yet highly popular, showing how populism can thrive in a democracy. His rhetoric, often laced with profanity and disregard for diplomatic norms, appealed to those who felt left behind by traditional politicians. Reflection: did Duterte's presidency empower the people or weaken democracy? While Duterte's popularity was undeniable, his administration raised concerns about the erosion of democratic norms, press freedom, and human rights. His rule demonstrated that populism can be a double-edged sword, offering strong leadership but at the risk of weakening institutions. The Marcos Jr. administration, 2022, present continuity or change. Hold on to power. The election of Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. in 2022 marked the political comeback of the Marcos dynasty, decades after the downfall of his father, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. His victory was fueled by historical revisionism, social media influence, and a well-organized campaign that rebranded the Marcos name. Key aspects of his administration include a focus on economic recovery post-pandemic, continuing Duterte's foreign policy approach, balancing ties with both the US and China, emphasizing infrastructure projects, echoing his father's legacy, handling of inflation, food security, and national debt. However, many questions remain. Will Marcos Jr. bring real governance reforms, or will he continue traditional political practices? How will he handle calls for accountability regarding past human rights violations and ill-gotten wealth? Reflection: is Marcos Jr.'s presidency a break from the past, or a continuation of the political status quo? His leadership provides an opportunity to either redefine the Marcos legacy or confirm fears of history repeating itself. The coming years will test whether he can truly address long-standing political and economic challenges or merely maintain the cycle of elite-dominated governance. Final thoughts. The 21st century has been a period of political turbulence, continuity, and change. It has shown that Filipinos remain deeply divided between those seeking reform and those longing for strong, decisive leadership. The lessons from this era will shape the future of Philippine democracy, but the most pressing question remains. Will Filipinos finally break free from the cycle of history, or will they continue to relive it? Chapter 8: The Future of Philippine Politics. Political dynasties and their influence. Political dynasties have been a defining feature of Philippine politics for much of its modern history. From the Spanish colonial period to the present, the concentration of political power within a few elite families has shaped the nation's governance and decision-making processes. Historically, the emergence of political dynasties can be traced to the elite landowners who gained power during the Spanish regime and later the American colonial period, when local elites collaborated with the colonial authorities to maintain their wealth and power. Throughout the 20th century, powerful families like the Marqueses, Aquinos, and Macapagal Arroyo clans solidified their control over the nation's political landscape. This influence is perpetuated by the nature of the political system, where elections and governance are often driven by personalities rather than platforms. The influence of political dynasties is visible not only at the national level but also at the local level, where family members serve in different branches of government in many provinces, cities, and municipalities. Reflectively, political dynasties raise important questions about the nature of democracy and governance. While they argue that their long-standing political influence allows them to serve their constituents effectively, critics point to the lack of political innovation and the perpetuation of patronage systems that often stifle real reforms. The future of Philippine politics could hinge on whether the nation can break free from these dynastic cycles and cultivate a more meritocratic political system, where leaders are chosen based on their qualifications and service to the people rather than their family name. The role of youth and social media in shaping politics. The role of youth and social media in shaping the future of Philippine politics cannot be overstated. In recent years, the youth demographic has become more politically active and influential, particularly through platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. These platforms have given young Filipinos a powerful voice, allowing them to mobilize, organize, and express their political opinions in ways that were once not possible. The rise of social media warriors and influencers has altered the political discourse, enabling political movements to gain momentum quickly, bypassing traditional media channels. The youth's role has been especially evident in the past few elections, where social media played a crucial part in rallying support for political candidates and spreading information, both accurate and misleading. The ability of young Filipinos to engage in political debates, advocate for change, and challenge political norms is a testament to the evolving nature of Philippine politics. Reflectively, however, this newfound power also brings with it significant challenges. The spread of misinformation and fake news on social media has the potential to deepen divisions and hinder constructive political discourse. As the future unfolds, the youth's capacity for critical thinking and responsible engagement will be critical in determining whether social media continues to empower or destabilize political processes. Challenges and prospects for good governance. Good governance in the Philippines has long been a challenge, with corruption, inefficiency, and a lack of accountability often cited as major obstacles to progress. The historical legacy of political dynasties, coupled with a culture of patronage politics, has made it difficult to implement comprehensive reforms. Furthermore, the political landscape has often been shaped by short-term interests, such as securing electoral victories or catering to powerful factions, rather than long-term national development. One of the most pressing challenges for good governance is the strengthening of democratic institutions. In a system where political patronage and dynastic control are deeply entrenched, it can be difficult to promote transparency and accountability. Additionally, the Philippines' vulnerability to natural disasters and economic inequality further complicates governance efforts. The decentralization of power to local government units has brought some progress in addressing regional disparities, but issues like local corruption and mismanagement persist. Evident in the past few elections, where social media played a crucial part in rallying support for political candidates and spreading information, both accurate and misleading. The ability of young Filipinos to engage in political debates, advocate for change, and challenge political norms is a testament to the evolving nature of Philippine politics. Reflectively, however, this newfound power also brings with it significant challenges. The spread of misinformation and fake news on social media has the potential to deepen divisions and hinder constructive political discourse. As the future unfolds, the youth's capacity for critical thinking and responsible engagement will be critical in determining whether social media continues to improve. However, there are prospects for improving governance. The ongoing efforts to modernize the civil service, promote transparency through digital platforms, and enhance political participation through reforms like the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, BARMM, reflect a growing recognition of the need for change. Furthermore, the increasing awareness of issues such as climate change and economic inequality could pave the way for more inclusive and sustainable governance models. The future of Philippine politics will ultimately depend on the nation's ability to tackle these challenges. The prospects for good governance are brighter when the political landscape is shaped by a new generation of leaders, committed to reforms and driven by the collective will of the people. The increasing political awareness of Filipinos, along with the empowerment of marginalized communities, offers hope for a more inclusive and equitable future. Reflective conclusion. Looking to the future of Philippine politics will likely be shaped by a combination of historical patterns and emerging forces. While political dynasties may continue to exert influence in the short term, the younger generation and the increasing role of social media may provide an avenue for change and reform. The challenge for the Philippines will be to create a political environment where good governance, transparency, and accountability are not just ideals but achievable goals. As the nation faces new challenges in the 21st century, the political landscape must evolve to meet the needs and aspirations of all Filipinos, ensuring a future that is not dominated by a few, but instead led by the many, in service to the common good. Conclusion. As we reflect on the long and complex history of Philippine politics, we are reminded of the profound lessons that continue to shape our present-day governance and the future of our nation. From the Spanish colonial period through to the struggles for independence, the rise and fall of political regimes, and the fight for democracy, each phase of our history imparts crucial wisdom that should guide our current leaders and citizens alike. Key lessons from Philippine political history. Resilience and unity in the face of adversity. Philippine history teaches us that resilience is a core value that sustains the nation through difficult times. From the resistance against Spanish rule to the EDSA People Power Revolution, the Filipino people have demonstrated remarkable unity in times of crisis. These moments underscore the strength that emerges when citizens unite for a common cause. The consequences of power abuse. Political history in the Philippines is rife with examples of how the abuse of power, corruption, and authoritarianism have harmed the nation. The dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos and the martial law era stands as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked authority. History reveals the importance of accountability, transparency, and the protection of democratic institutions in preventing the rise of such governance again. The struggle for democracy and freedom. From the early revolutionary movements to the Declaration of Independence, the Filipino people have fought for their freedom. The restoration of democracy in 1986 after the People Power Revolution further solidified the idea that political freedom is a constant pursuit. We must never take the hard-earned freedoms we enjoy today for granted. The importance of education and awareness. The history of the Philippines also reflects the role of education in shaping the political consciousness of the nation. National heroes like Jose Rizal emphasized the value of an informed citizenry. Today, educating the public on civic responsibilities, the political process, and the importance of voting is vital for the strength of our democracy. How history informs present and future governance. Our political history does not exist in isolation but is interwoven with our present and future political landscape. The choices made by leaders today are influenced by the lessons, mistakes, and successes of the past. The failures of authoritarianism and corruption remind us of the need for checks and balances, the protection of human rights, and an active, informed electorate. Meanwhile, the triumphs of collective action during moments like the EDSA revolution illustrate the power of the people in demanding change, reinforcing the belief that governance should always prioritize the people's welfare. Looking toward the future, the lessons of history urge us to continue striving for political systems that are inclusive, transparent, and equitable. History provides a blueprint for both the preservation of democracy and the continuous improvement of the state, ensuring that governance evolves to meet the changing needs of the nation. Call to action, the role of citizens in shaping the nation. The true strength of a democracy lies not just in the hands of its leaders but in the collective action of its citizens. The role of every Filipino citizen in shaping the future of the nation is pivotal. From voting in elections to engaging in community affairs, from holding public officials accountable to standing up for the marginalized, the duty of citizenship is both a privilege and a responsibility. As we move forward, it is crucial for Filipinos to take an active role in the political process, guided by the values of justice, equality, and respect for human dignity. Citizens should demand transparency, advocate for policies that foster inclusive growth, and challenge injustices wherever they arise. Just as our forebears fought for our freedom, today's citizens must be vigilant and engaged in the preservation and enhancement of our democratic values. In conclusion, Philippine political history serves as both a mirror and a guide. By understanding where we've been, we can better navigate where we are going. The lessons of the past remind us of the value of democracy, the danger of complacency, and the power of the people to shape their future. It is time for each Filipino to embrace their role in the ongoing story of the nation, for only through active participation can we ensure that the future of the Philippines is bright and full of promise. Here are some analytical questions and answers based on the structure you provided. Introduction. 1. What is the purpose of this ebook, and how does it aim to educate its readers? Answer. The purpose of this ebook is to provide a comprehensive exploration of Philippine political history, analyzing key events, figures, and periods that have shaped the governance and political landscape of the country. It aims to educate readers about the impact of these historical events on modern politics and governance, fostering a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for the nation. 2. Why is it important to reflect on Philippine political history? Answer. Reflecting on Philippine political history is crucial because it helps citizens understand the origins of current political issues and structures. By studying the past, individuals can grasp the lessons learned, the mistakes made, and the progress achieved. This reflection helps build a more informed electorate that can actively participate in democratic processes, ensuring better governance and accountability. 3. How have historical events shaped modern governance in the Philippines? Answer: historical events such as the Revolution for Independence, colonization, martial law, and the People Power Revolution have profoundly influenced modern governance. They shape the political culture, the structure of the government, the role of political parties, and the relationship between citizens and the state. These events have also contributed to the ongoing struggle for democratic values, transparency, and accountability in governance. Chapter 1: The Revolutionary Period, 1896 to 1898. 1. What was the significance of the Katipunan in the fight for Philippine independence? Answer: The Katipunan was a revolutionary group founded by Andres Bonifacio that played a pivotal role in the Philippine struggle for independence from Spanish colonial rule. It mobilized Filipinos across the archipelago to rise up against Spanish tyranny and laid the groundwork for the establishment of the First Philippine Republic. 2. Did the revolution achieve its goals of independence, and why or why not? Answer: While the revolution led to the declaration of Philippine independence in 1898, it did not fully achieve its goal of lasting sovereignty, as the Philippines soon fell under American control. The revolution, however, ignited a national consciousness and laid the foundation for future struggles for independence. Chapter 2: The American Colonial Period, 1898 to 1946. 1. How did the Treaty of Paris shape the Philippines' relationship with the United States? Answer: The Treaty of Paris, which ended the Spanish-American War, ceded the Philippines to the United States, marking the beginning of American colonial rule. This treaty set the stage for the Philippines' transition from Spanish rule to American occupation, and it marked the beginning of a complex relationship involving political control, economic exploitation, and cultural influence. 2. What role did resistance movements play during the Philippine-American War? Answer: Resistance movements were critical in opposing American colonization. The Philippine-American War, fought from 1899 to 1902, was the Filipino people's struggle for independence. Though they were ultimately defeated, the resistance demonstrated the Filipino desire for self-rule and resistance to foreign domination. Chapter 3: The Japanese Occupation and World War II, 1941 to 1945. 1. How did the Japanese occupation impact Philippine governance? Answer: The Japanese occupation disrupted the political systems in place and led to the establishment of the Second Philippine Republic under Jose P. Laurel, a puppet government aligned with Japan. The occupation also fostered significant resistance movements, including the Hagbalahap, which challenged the Japanese and later became a significant player in post-war politics. 2. What was the significance of the return of American influence post-liberation? Answer: The return of American influence after World War II signaled the resumption of U.S. political and military presence in the Philippines. This transition led to the granting of independence in 1946 but also marked the beginning of a new period of dependency, with the U.S. retaining significant control over the country's military bases and economic policies. Chapter 4: The Post-War Republic and Early Independence, 1946 to 1965. 1. How did Manuel Roxas contribute to the newly independent nation's challenges? Answer: As the first president of the Independent Republic of the Philippines, Manuel Roxas faced immense challenges such as rebuilding the country from war devastation, establishing a new government, and navigating complex relationships with the United States. His administration laid the groundwork for the post-war economic policies but also encountered criticism for leaning heavily on American interests. 2. How did political dynasties and corruption impact governance during this period? Answer: The rise of political dynasties during this period contributed to the consolidation of political power in the hands of a few families, which often led to corruption, clientelism, and an unequal distribution of wealth and resources. This undermined the ideals of democracy and equitable governance. Chapter 5, The Marcos Era and Martial Law, 1965 to 1986. 1. What were the long-term consequences of Ferdinand Marcos's declaration of martial law? Answer. The declaration of martial law in 1972 had profound consequences, including the erosion of civil liberties, widespread human rights abuses, and the consolidation of power under Marcos and his cronies. The long-term impact was a generation scarred by political repression, corruption, and the dismantling of democratic institutions, which took years to rebuild. 2. How did the People Power Revolution shape modern Philippine politics? Answer. The People Power Revolution of 1986 demonstrated the power of nonviolent, mass mobilization in overthrowing a dictatorial regime. It restored democratic processes in the Philippines and became a symbol of the people's ability to demand change. This event reshaped modern politics by reinforcing the importance of civic engagement and the defense of democratic freedoms. Chapter 6, The Post-EDSA Governments, 1986 to 2000. 1. How did Corazon Aquino's administration restore democracy in the Philippines? Answer. Corazon Aquino's administration marked the restoration of democracy following the fall of Ferdinand Marcos. She reinstated democratic institutions, oversaw the drafting of a new constitution in 1987, and worked to heal a divided nation. Her leadership symbolized the Filipino people's triumph over dictatorship and their commitment to democratic principles. 2. What were the economic and political challenges faced during the Estrada presidency? Answer. Joseph Estrada's presidency was marked by economic stagnation, corruption scandals, and widespread dissatisfaction, culminating in his impeachment and eventual ousting. His administration highlighted the vulnerability of political systems to corruption and the need for stronger checks and balances. Chapter 7, The 21st Century Philippine Politics, 2001-present. 1. How did the Aquino administration's then Matuwid program impact governance? Answer. The Aquino administration's then Matuwid program aimed to promote good governance through transparency, anti-corruption measures, and institutional reforms. While it achieved some successes, such as improved economic growth and the resolution of the South China Sea dispute through international arbitration, it faced criticism for inefficiencies and its handling of certain issues like typhoon relief efforts. 2. How did Duterte's populist leadership alter Philippine politics? Answer. Duterte's populist leadership shifted Philippine politics toward authoritarianism, with a focus on strongman tactics and controversial policies such as the war on drugs. His leadership polarized the nation but also resonated with many citizens who desired a tough approach to crime and corruption. His policies raised concerns about human rights and democratic backsliding. Chapter 8, The Future of Philippine Politics. 1. What role do political dynasties play in shaping the future of Philippine politics? Answer. Political dynasties continue to dominate Philippine politics, consolidating power and perpetuating inequality. Their influence may impede efforts for political reform and democratic accountability, as power remains concentrated in the hands of a few families. Future political reforms must address this issue to ensure more equitable representation. 2. How might youth and social media influence the future of Philippine governance? Answer. Youth and social media have become powerful forces in shaping political discourse, as young Filipinos increasingly use digital platforms to express their views, mobilize for causes, and hold politicians accountable. This trend could lead to more dynamic and participatory governance, although it also poses challenges regarding misinformation and polarization. Conclusion. 1. What key lessons from Philippine political history should guide future governance? Answer. Key lessons include the importance of upholding democracy, protecting human rights, fostering transparency, and ensuring political accountability. These principles should guide future governance to avoid repeating past mistakes and to create a more just and equitable society. 2. How can citizens contribute to shaping the future of Philippine politics? Answer. Citizens can actively participate in the political process by voting, holding elected officials accountable, engaging in informed political discourse, and advocating for policies that prioritize the common good. They also have the power to challenge corruption and demand greater transparency from public servants. Block quotes and practical applications. Introduction. Block quote. Reflecting on the past allows us to better understand the present and prepare for the future. History is not just a record of events, it is a guide to how we govern and engage as a nation. Practical applications. Engage in civic education to understand the historical roots of present governance. Reflect on key moments in Philippine history to shape your views on current political events. Participate in discussions and debates on governance informed by historical knowledge. Chapter 1, The Revolutionary Period, 1896 to 1898. Block quote. The revolution was not just a fight for independence but a call for the Filipino people's right to self-determination and dignity. Practical applications. Understand the importance of unity in times of political unrest. Study the roles of key historical figures like Bonifacio and Aguinaldo in shaping the country's independence. Reflect on how the outcomes of the revolution continue to influence the nation's governance today. Chapter 2, The American Colonial Period, 1898 to 1946. Block quote. The transition from resistance to collaboration under American rule set the stage for a new era in Philippine governance, blending nationalism with the reality of colonial authority. Practical applications. Recognize the complexities of colonial rule and how it influenced modern Filipino identity. Understand the ongoing struggle for sovereignty and how it shaped future political movements. Learn from the Philippine-American War to appreciate the importance of national defense and independence. Era in Philippine governance, blending nationalism with the reality of colonial authority. Chapter 3, The Japanese Occupation and World War II, 1941 to 1945. Block quote. The Filipino spirit of resistance, even under occupation, reflects the indomitable will to preserve freedom and dignity, even in the darkest of times. Practical applications. Recognize the importance of national resilience in the face of foreign occupation. Study the impact of the Second Philippine Republic and its limited sovereignty during wartime. Reflect on the role of collaboration versus resistance in shaping the post-war political environment. Chapter 4, The Post-War Republic and Early Independence, 1946 to 1965. Block quote. True independence is not only about political sovereignty but also economic freedom, and these early years of independence were marked by struggles to secure both. Practical applications. Acknowledge the importance of self-sufficiency in a newly independent nation. Understand the long-term impact of post-colonial economic policies on today's economy. Learn from the challenges of the early republic to better navigate the complex relationship between governance and global influence. Chapter 5, The Marcos Era and Martial Law, 1965 to 1986. Block quote. The martial law period was a harsh reminder that democracy is fragile and must be protected against authoritarianism at all costs. Practical applications. Understand the impact of political dynasties and authoritarian rule on modern governance. Advocate for checks and balances in government to prevent abuse of power. Participate in defending democratic institutions and human rights. Chapter 6, The Post-EDSA Governments, 1986 to 2000. Block quote. After EDSA, the Philippines was reminded that democracy is not a one-time victory but a continuous struggle that requires the vigilance and participation of all citizens. Practical applications. Stay informed about democratic processes and the importance of active citizenship. Reflect on the balance between political leadership and public accountability. Learn from the struggles of post-EDSA governments to improve governance systems today. Chapter 7, The 21st Century Philippine Politics, 2001 present. Block quote. The challenges of the 21st century are not just political, but also moral and social, requiring leaders and citizens alike to rethink what governance truly means. Practical applications. Engage with contemporary political debates and reflect on the evolving role of social media in politics. Understand the growing influence of populism and the responsibility of citizens to discern truth in political narratives. Monitor and evaluate the ongoing changes in political leadership for opportunities to strengthen democratic institutions. Chapter 8: The Future of Philippine Politics. Block quote: The future of Philippine politics lies in empowering the youth, encouraging civic engagement, and embracing reforms that can make governance more transparent and accountable. Practical applications. Support programs and initiatives that engage the youth in political education. Advocate for policies that encourage transparency, accountability, and good governance. Stay proactive in your role as a citizen by being involved in community building and political discourse. Conclusion. Block quote: History is not just a reflection of where we have been, it is a beacon guiding us to where we can go, urging us to be active participants in shaping the future of our nation. Practical applications. Take active responsibility in shaping the nation's future by engaging in the political process. Reflect on the lessons of history to ensure that governance remains focused on the welfare of the people. Commit to holding leaders accountable and fostering an informed, active citizenry.